I am going to tell you about how I use science to understand who I am. You might be thinking, psychology, definitely some kind of biology, maybe neuroscience. I'm actually not that kind of doctor. I have used quantum mechanics to understand who I am, and I'm going to tell you about that. But don't worry, I'm going to teach you a little bit of physics first. I am that kind of doctor. This ball, when I throw it up and catch it, has a position in time and space, a speed, a momentum, an energy, all of these properties that are very predictable, very well-defined, measurable. This is the way that we interact with the world. We know these properties. We can catch this ball. When things get very small, though, things get weirder. Atoms, protons, neutrons, electrons, subatomic particles. They're a little bit harder to predict. These particles can also act like waves, so they no longer have a well-defined position and momentum or an energy over a very short period of time. A particle is instead described by its probability of being observed in a possible position, with possible values for position, energy, momentum, and so on. The probabilities are all combined as a superposition of possible values, described by something in quantum mechanics called the wave function. The quantum mechanical description of this world is probably unfamiliar to you. It's just not the way we interact with things. Most of the time, the weirdness of quantum mechanics, though real, doesn't make a difference in the way that we understand the world. But I do think it can be a helpful analogy for the way that we understand our inner world and ourselves. When I was a kid, my identity seemed straightforward, like a ball that I could throw up and catch pretty easily. I was above all a smart kid, a classic Lisa Simpson, if you will. There's photographic proof. I loved school. I got good grades, especially in math and science. And I got a full scholarship to college. I majored in physics and astronomy, and also German, because why not? I went to graduate school for a PhD in astronomy and astrophysics. I got a postdoctoral position here in New York City at the American Museum of Natural History. I started a research group, BDNYC, that's the subway logos that are up there. I got a faculty position at CUNY. I published papers. I got grants. I mentored students. I got tenure. And now I'm here. But if that were the full story, I wouldn't actually be talking to you about quantum mechanics, probably. In college, that single smart kid ball got harder to track. I still got good grades, but I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And it turns out that smart kid is not actually a career. I did a lot of other random stuff outside of my classes. I played on the ice hockey team. I was a DJ at the college radio station. I was on the quiz bowl team. Okay, maybe that one is a little bit predictable. But I didn't actually, even though I loved studying astronomy, I didn't know what I wanted to do after college. And if there's any students in the audience that can relate to that, don't worry, you got this. You'll figure it out. I had a research internship for a little bit of time, but I quit it because I found another job that paid better and had free snacks, to give you an idea of my priorities at the time. When I graduated from college, I lost track of the smart kid ball altogether, at least for a little while. I had no job. I had no plans. I moved to a different city entirely where I hardly knew anybody. Eventually, I found not one, but 4 part-time minimum wage jobs. One of the jobs, though, happened to be at a planetarium that I only knew about because I had visited on trips to see my grandparents when I was growing up. It was my first taste of learning about the night sky and of communicating science to the public, and I loved it. It made me even more certain that I wanted to go to graduate school and learn how to do the science that I was beginning to know how to share with people. I found that smart kid ball again in graduate school. It was a little bit more slippery this time. But most of the time, I loved graduate school. I met awesome people. I traveled to a new city, explored there. I got to travel for research and for conferences, but I never actually dared to say, I want to be a professor, because I knew how slim the odds were. And I still did lots of other stuff besides the research that I was in graduate school to do. I refurbished the planetarium that was in the department. I explained exhibits to visitors at the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles. I led science experiments for middle schoolers at the California Science Center. I was even an entrepreneur of sorts in the department, so I bought snacks in bulk, resold them to my fellow graduate students, and kept myself in a steady supply of Diet Coke while I finished my thesis. After I graduated and got the postdoc and then the faculty position that I hadn't actually dared dream about, these side quests, though, persisted. As a professor, my identity went from one ball to lots of balls, all of which were really hard to keep track of, and most of which I hadn't actually been trained to do in graduate school. I was juggling so many different roles: researcher, teacher, mentor, writer. I couldn't even begin to keep track of them all. And after being such a high-achieving student for so long, not being able to succeed at absolutely everything felt like failure. If I wasn't a successful science professor juggling all of these balls at once, who was I? I never thought that figuring out who I am would be a bigger challenge than getting tenure. I knew I would need support, but what I didn't expect was for that support to become a network and then a community. My support system started with an executive coach. Sounds fancy and professional. I met her through a mentoring program for women in STEM. And wonderfully, luckily for me, she was more like a therapist with training wheels. It took me 3 more tries to find a therapist that I stuck with, and a lot longer than that to stop crying at every session. And in retrospect, the first therapist that I met with was right that I was having an identity crisis, although at the time I thought that was absurd. What I also didn't expect was for some of these side quests that I originally started as distractions from the thing that I was supposed to be doing, earning tenure, to become a huge part of my identity and my community. These projects were science-related, but not technically the things that I was there to do: research, teaching, and service. I'm going to tell you about a couple of them just to brag a little bit. So the first side project is called Astronomy on Tap, which is maybe what it sounds like: science presentations at bars by scientists. What isn't to love about this? What I was surprised about, so I didn't officially start this, but I helped a friend of mine bring it to New York City. I gave it the name. Even by the time the first one ended, we were planning more, and they were starting to spread to other cities around the world, because I guess astronomers enjoy sharing their science at bars, just like I do. What I didn't expect is for this shy nerd, this little Lisa Simpson, to love being on stage and making an audience laugh at a bar. I created, though, a persona to be this person. And so that person up there in the orange wig and the glasses is not me. That's actually DJ Carly Sagan. What identity crisis. The second project that I started was a blog that I started with a friend of mine to share what we found called astrofashion. So we were doing outreach events together, and we realized that we were wearing these astronomy-themed clothing that we could find and wear and share, and we loved it. Things like nerdy t-shirts, light-up constellation skirts, galaxy leggings. What I didn't realize is that when we shared this blog with the astronomy community, that they would love it as well. In fact, I was terrified before I did this. So this picture shows our first presentation about the blog at a research conference. And I literally had a nightmare the night before thinking the other scientists are going to come up and kick us out, because what is fashion doing in this very serious research conference? On the other hand, they loved it. They wanted to buy it and wear it themselves. And so we went from finding things to designing our own. And I went from a blogger to the CEO of a fashion brand and an online shop that we call Startorialist. I took on the role of the head of product design, marketing, sales, all of these things that I never would have imagined myself doing as Lisa Simpson. Lots more balls to keep in the air. As my career progressed, these side quests provided a wonderful community of support. I also joined not one, but 2 peer mentoring groups with other women in science and science professors. And I realized that I wasn't the only one struggling to juggle all of these balls. It was both shocking and reassuring at the same time to learn that the other women who were super intelligent and accomplished faced similar challenges including seeing themselves as successful science professors along with all of the other roles that they inhabited, including the role that would actually become my biggest challenge, and that one is becoming a mom. That identity wasn't even one that I was certain that I wanted, but I assumed that I could have it if I did decide that I wanted it. When it became apparent to me that I probably wasn't going to get pregnant the old-fashioned way, I'll spare you the details, it was hard to accept, though, that my body was failing at the one thing that society for my whole entire life had been telling me it was made to do. Ultimately, my first child was conceived using IVF, in vitro fertilization, and now luckily I have two wonderful kids who humored me when I made them watch a rocket launch on Christmas of 2021, bringing a new space telescope into orbit for NASA and the CSA and the European Space Agency as well. Now they want a rocket launch every Christmas. In retrospect, the winter before the beginning of my first pregnancy was the darkest season of my life. But it was also the beginning of my embracing all of these disparate aspects of my identity all at once. I don't think I did very well at first. I wanted to stay very visible as a professor after I had my kid, so I attended faculty meetings wearing an infant, even though nobody would have minded if I had stayed home just to enjoy my baby. I demanded a key to the first pumping room on campus, even though it was 3 buildings away from mine, and I also demanded a mini fridge to put in my office to store pumped breast milk. I never even took it out of the box. I was forcing myself to juggle all of these professor balls and the mom ball. And those are all tough ones to keep track of at once. I think I was afraid that if I took my eyes off of any of them, even for just a moment, I would lose track of them altogether. I wanted people to see me in a certain way as a successful science professor. So I subverted the other aspects of my identity that I thought might take away from that. But all of this juggling and this sleight of hand, this is the classical mechanics way of thinking about these things. As predictable, as deterministic, as immutable. I was trying to juggle all of these balls at once instead of leaning into the quantum mechanics that I had learned. So the quantum mechanics tells us that via the principle of superposition, these many different possibilities can coexist, and any one of them can be observed at any given time, kind of like lottery balls in a daily draw. Our identity is not just the one single number that gets pulled up, but it's all of the other balls that are bouncing around down there still, waiting for their turn. We are each a unique superposition of probabilities, our strengths and our weaknesses, our successes and failures, our goals and our side quests, that change with both space and time, sometimes imperceptibly, sometimes seismically, and in unpredictable ways. A complete description of our true selves, our wave function in quantum mechanics terminology, can be wildly complex, even intractable. We rely on estimates and approximations, simplified scenarios and limiting cases in order to grapple with them and to get them down on paper. And even then, the wave function just doesn't describe who we are at that one instance in time, but who we could be at any moment with some probability. Our quantum mechanical identities are like those wave functions, a superposition of all of the possibilities that then might collapse into one value when the system is observed. Maybe it happens when somebody makes a judgment about who we are, or when we are forced to inhabit a particular role for a moment: teacher, scientist, CEO, mother. Those other possibilities, though, aren't gone. They're just minimized temporarily. A quantum mechanical identity will eventually relax and meander back into a complex wave function, maybe even different from what it was before. Ultimately, you can't control how other people see you. But maybe you can, like me, learn to appreciate your own wave function, that complexity and unpredictableness underlying our identity, even our existence. We're not just what others see us in a moment, but all of the possibilities waiting to be realized. Thank you.